Boy the Wandering Dog by Marshall Saunders. Chapter 22. Mrs. Waverlee's School. Old Czarina, who came from Russia, says the most wonderful thing to her in this Green Hill district is the school for children in Neighborhood Hall. This is the building that Master and Mr. Bonstone put up on the village square. It is a big white erection with colonial pillars and plenty of verandas, and it has a garden round it and a playground for little children, and inside is a library, a restaurant, a swimming pool, a pretty parlor where young people can dance and play games, and a big hall where moving pictures are given. The country people just pour into it in the evening. Everyone pays 5 cents, and after a certain length of time the village will own the whole place, for Mr. Bonstone and my master believe in public ownership of public amusements. One rule of the moving picture hall delights us dogs greatly. No trainer of animals can ever exhibit his creatures there. That is in the charter. One good-sized room in the hall was reserved for a school for the children of the village, and Mrs. Waverlee is their teacher. To come back to Czarina, she says that if all children in Russia could have such a teacher as Mrs. Waverlee, there would not be so much misery among them. She says that in her country great pains are taken with the education of the children of the rich. They are made to speak French, and if a child forgets and addresses the mother in Russian, he or she is made to say the sentence over again in French and sometimes in English, for they have governesses and nurses of different nationalities. In this wonderful country of America, says Czarina, you educate everybody. I was amazed to see a little Russian Jewess with her arms around Mrs. Waverlee's neck the other day. In her own country the child would be kept down, and if she had a teacher, would not dare to embrace her. Imagine the delight of her parents at having a rich, cultured woman like Mrs. Waverlee devoting herself to the education of their child. All the dogs love Mrs. Waverlee, but Gringo is her stoutest admirer, partly on account of the English blood in his veins, and he often runs down to her school and calls on her, or visits her in the pretty cottage in which she lives with Egbert. She welcomes any well-behaved dog to her school, and the other day Gringo and I sauntered down to the village and approached Neighborhood Hall. It was a lovely day, and the doors were all wide open. We trotted across the tennis court and the place where the boys and girls play basketball to the garden at the back of the hall. There is a big patch of greensward there, with a pond in the middle, where some white ducks and pets of the children are always paddling about. The children were all out on the grass, the most of them with bare feet. When Mrs. Waverlee caught sight of us, she called with her pretty English accent, "Good morning, dogs. Come to me." We walked toward her, Gringo with his queer sidewise gait like that of a racking horse. He never picks up his paws the way a fox terrier does. "How fortunate!" exclaimed Mrs. Waverlee, as we lay down on the grass beside her. "Our lesson this morning is on the dog, and I had not a single dog caller. Now, children, do these two friends of mine suggest anything?" "Tell us about the bulldogs, please," the most of them cried. 2 little girls were for fox terriers, but they were in the minority. "Some people blame Mrs. Waverlee because she allows the children to follow their own bent so much. One day, before the war closed, I heard her say to a lady, 'Would it not be cruel, when these little creatures come to school, bursting with questions about affairs in Europe that they hear you older ones discussing, for me to pin them down to a lesson in grammar, for example? No. I find out which way their minds lead me, and I follow it. Mornings, when they want to know how the Germans and the Allies are getting on, I spread out a map on the grass and give them a united geography, history, and peace lesson." Mrs. Waverlee shut her eyes as she spoke. No one knew what agony it cost her to discuss the war, but she was not a woman to dodge her duty. She met it squarely in the face. The lady who was criticizing her said with reluctant admiration, "My boy certainly does display an unusual knowledge of current events, but I am conservative in my ideas and would like him brought up along old lines." "Then you must take him from here," said Mrs. Waverlee sweetly. "The best and newest in an educational way is what Mr. Bonstone and Mr. Granton insist on." The lady didn't take her son away, and a little later I heard her gushing to Mrs. Bonstone over the school. "I never heard of anything like it," she said. "The other day my husband brought home to dinner a distinguished Swiss scholar. When my Frankie heard our guest was from Switzerland, he ran up to him, climbed on his knee, and asked him the most intelligent questions about his own country. He knew about the different cantons, the fine system of military service, the high mountains, the villages in the cup-like valleys, the big hotels, the peasants, the German Swiss and the French Swiss, and the coolness between them that the war has brought to a close. And he even yodeled for Monsieur de la Bontaine, who is French Swiss. The man was in an ecstasy. He pressed my child to his heart. He exclaimed, 'Madame, I have not heard any grown man or woman talk in so picturesque a way about my country since I came to America. It is a marvel. When did you have him in Switzerland?' 'I never had him there,' I told him, and at first he could scarcely believe me. Frankie came to my assistance. 'Mrs. Waverlee makes a country out in the garden,' he said. 'We have sand and toy trees and houses and men and women and stones, and we build mountains and make villages and forests, and then we go in the big hall and see the moving pictures of it. Oh, it is great fun.' Monsieur de la Bontaine asked permission to visit the school, and he fell in love with Mrs. Waverlee. No, I shall not take Frankie away. I am going to give Mrs. Waverlee $500 to spend on further equipment for the school." Mrs. Bonstone was enchanted, and told her husband and my master how well their scheme was working out. Master sighed. He was never satisfied with what he had done. He was always looking ahead. "Oh, for such a school for every young child in New York," he said. Now, to stop wondering and go back to the day of our call. Gringo often says,
"Boy, you are an A1 dog, but you reminisce too much."
Mrs. Waverlee put him up on the top of a box. Then didn't she exhaust the bulldog subject? She went her way back to the days in old England when cruel sports flourished. She told how men can take breeds of animals and birds and change them. The bulldog was inbred until they got an animal perfectly adapted to the sport of bull baiting. She had some of the boys wheel out of doors an almost life-sized cow that is part of the school plant. She opened Gringo's mouth, and the old fellow rolled his eyes kindly, while she showed the vice-like construction of his jaws. Then she asked him if he would make a spring at the cow, to show the children how the ancient bulldog used to leap at the bull's head and hold on by his teeth. Gringo crooked his hind legs, gave one of his cat leaps, and landed on the cow's upper lip. I don't know what that old cow was made of, but there Gringo hung, and Mrs. Waverlee showed the children how his lay-back nose enabled him to breathe while he retained his grip. By and by the lip broke off, and then some of the children cried. "This is too realistic," said Mrs. Waverlee. But the cow is not hurt, and the wicked sport of bull baiting is all over. I may say in passing that some people blame Mrs. Waverlee because she does not keep everything painful from the children. I do not wish to make them soft, she says with flashing eyes. Evil and suffering are all about them. They must have some acquaintance with them in order to be able to overcome them. I make my own boy sit in school beside a beautiful and innocent German lad to teach him to overcome his hatred for the nation. After the cow had been wheeled away, and her broken nose hidden in a young lilac bush, Mrs. Waverlee said, "Now let us examine Doggie's points." I opened my eyes. I didn't know she knew so much about dogs. She made Gringo walk away from her and toward her, and she felt his back and his head and had him sit down and get up, and she turned over his rose ears to show the children the pink lining, and pinched his brisket, and lifted his feet to see if they were sound, showed the children the set out of the shoulders that enabled a bulldog to crouch low between the horns of an angry bull who tried to gore him. Then she explained that sometimes 20 or 30 dogs would be killed before the bull could be thrown. That was news to me, and I whispered to Gringo, "I didn't know you actually had to throw the bull."
"Certainly,"
he replied.
"A heavy dog with a good grip could do it easily if he knew how."
After Mrs. Waverlee penalized Gringo slightly because the wheel of his back wasn't quite perfect, he stepped off the box and everybody went home to lunch. Mrs. Waverlee invited Gringo and me to accompany her and Egbert to their cottage, and we had a fine lunch with Patsy, Egbert's fox terrier, who had been confined to the house with a sore paw. They had a lovely little cottage, but it had a small garden only. One day I heard Mrs. Bonstone, who has become very intimate with Mrs. Waverlee, say to her, "Britvalda, you are a rich woman. Why do you not buy a larger place than this?" "Why should I?" said Mrs. Waverlee indifferently. "I have neighborhood hall close by, and the river and the meadows are open to me, and the lanes and high road, and the pretty winding village street. It is all mine." "You queer creature," said Mrs. Bonstone, but her tone was admiring. Mrs. Waverlee glanced up at the sky with her strange other-world look. I don't believe anything in this world counts much with her, except getting human beings ready to go to the next one. "Shall I be there? Oh, shall I be there with my dear master?" just burst from my dog heart one day when I was sitting watching her as she gazed up at the sky. We were all alone, and that clairvoyant, beautiful woman understood me. "Dog," she said with exquisite gentleness, as she laid her hand on my head, "do you think the creator of this marvelous universe would ever destroy anything utterly in which he had placed the spark of life? No, we shall all live again, purified, immortalized, made perfect." I licked all the dust off her pretty feet. In her own garden she wore sandals and no stockings. I wished there was something hard I could do for her. I adore her. End of chapter 22.
Chapter 23. Living out here in the country as we do, I see a great many poor people, either coming here to beg, tramping by the high road, or sitting on the rustic benches that masters have had placed all along the sidewalks that bound his property. I am amazed at the topsy-turviness of their ideas. Now, rich people are not perfect, but on the whole they seem to have more common sense than the idle poor. These shabby dressed persons perch round on the benches, stare at master's big white house showing among the trees, and these are their sentiments. I wish I'd been born rich. I wish someone would die and leave me some money. I wish I didn't have to work. One man only, in the whole course of my eavesdropping under hedges, have I heard say, "That's a wise man in that big house. He's slaved for what he's got. Let him keep it." However, this kind of lazy talk does not affect Master and Mr. Bonstone. I have heard them say again and again that there are frightful inequalities in the human lot, that every man does not get a living wage, and there should be more brotherhood and sympathy between class and class. Perhaps that is why they never get disgusted or offended or suspicious. Some of the rich people about here say that they are bothered to death with squealing, envious poor persons who hang around them, begging for money for this scheme and that scheme, which has always at bottom the everlasting endeavor to get something for nothing. Master and Mr. Bonstone smile, and never worry, nor argue, nor fuss. They just keep on helping everyone that applies to them. One day, the first summer we came out here, I was up on the balcony, outside Master's bedroom, with him. He had come home from the city, very hot and tired, and he was having a lovely time, lounging in a big chair with a glass of lemonade at his elbow. The parlour maid came up and said that a young man wished to see him. Master got up patiently, put on his coat, and went downstairs with me at his heels. An unprepossessing looking young fellow awaited him in the hall. He had a loose mouth, and he talked out of one side of it, and his jaw was undershot, and one side like that of a badly put together dog. Master sat down on the monk's bench beside him. "What can I do for you, sir?" The lad twisted his rag of a cap in his hands. "I thought you might give me some money." "What do you want money for?" asked Master. "To get a job." Master smiled. "You don't wish money to get a job? You wish a job to get money?" "I had work," the fellow said, with a twist of his mouth, as if he tasted something bad, "but it didn't bring me in enough to keep body and soul together." "Now what kind of job do you want?" asked Master. "Something easy that will bring in lots of coin," he said audaciously. "Come now, you know things don't bring in lots of coin," said Master. The young fellow swept his eyes about the handsome entrance hall and said, "I bet you got this easy." Master shook his head and stifled a yawn. It was a hot day, and he does not believe in arguing. However, he said shortly, "I did work for it." "Go on," said the fellow jeeringly. "I don't swallow that." "Poor chap," said Master kindly. "No power of digestion. Not on your own fault, likely." "What are you giving me?" said the young man wonderingly. Master looked him all over. I knew what he was thinking. Poor, weak-backed gutter boy, fished out of the troubled waters of New York and sent here to be reformed. But it was Master's duty to undertake the job. Likely he'd fail, but it was up to him to try. "Come on, boy," he said suddenly, clapping the lad's greasy shoulder. "Let's go look for something for you." The lad put on his old reed of a cap on his head, but Master strolled out bareheaded, The sun was getting low, and it was not as hot as it had been. First he went to the gardens and tried them on the lad. Roses and cabbage did not appeal to him, and he surveyed them with a dull eye. He didn't care to dig in the ground. Master took him to the garage. No motor cars did not strike his fancy either. He hadn't courage nor skill enough to manage any kind of machine. The tiny stable was the next place to visit. Here lived Moonstone, a Shetland pony, nominally George Washington's. He was too young to ride it yet, and young Egbert had the sole use of it. Neither did the pony appeal to the poor city boy. I could have told Master he didn't care for animals, for he had successfully passed by me, Amadea, King Harry, and Canny, without a word for one of us. "Let's stroll down to the village," said Master. "Perhaps we'll find something there." So down we went along the high road, then fragrant with flowering rose bushes. First there was cottages and villas standing back from the road and gardens on lawns. The boy was not interested in them. When we got to the stores, his eye brightened. Master, who was watching him shrewdly, saw his hungry gaze go toward the grocer's. It was a store with a fine display. Behind big windows for the village women had a health association and would allow no food to be displayed on the street, were stacks of fruit and vegetables, and everything a first-class grocer should keep. All the neighborhood patronized the man, and it enabled him to keep an excellent stock. "Would you like to stand behind a counter?" asked Master. "I might," said the lad. "You think it would be an easy job?" said Master slyly. Then he smiled. The lad grinned. He had some sense of humor. "Mr. Washburn," explained my master, "may I speak to you?" The grocer came running from his office, where he was making up his accounts. "Will you take a friend of mine for a few days' trial?" asked Master. The grocer was immaculately clean, and his eye ran over the greasy-looking boy. "We'll have to fix him up a bit," said Master. "I'll take him," said Mr. Washburn, "on your recommendation." "Don't work him too hard at first," said Master. "You're a hustler, I know." The lad opened his dull eyes and looked so dismayed that the two men burst out laughing. Finally the young fellow laughed too. He felt that he would not be imposed on. Master then took him to the village shoemaker, whose wife kept a boarding house for young men. Here were a number of city lads who were working in Mr. Bonstone's automobile school. It was now close on 6 o'clock, and they were all sitting on the front veranda, with their feet on the railing. Master introduced the newcomer and asked one of the lads to take him to the dry goods store and buy a ready-made suit, have it charged to him, also to take him to the neighborhood hall and introduce him and give him a good time. The newcomer, whose name was Walt Dixon, took care of everything as a matter of course. He showed neither surprise nor gratitude. Master nodded his head slightly to the lad who was to take him in charge. That meant, watch him, find out what his morals are. If there is anything that would endanger village life, let me know and I'll ship him elsewhere. Now all this happened some time ago, and as Gringo says, it's up to Walt Dixon to make good. But he can't. He's merely a putty sort of lad. He does his work spasmodically. He tries the grocer's patience. He has always to be watched and guarded. Nobody likes him. Nobody dislikes him. He's not immoral. He's not strictly moral. He's a kind of grown-up baby, Master says. but he's supporting himself, and he's out of New York, where he's loafed and lived off the earnings of his mother and sister. The only good thing about him is that he's faintly grateful and slightly attached to my master, and I should not wonder if some day he would be brought to our house to work in some capacity or other. The most of master's brother boys, as he calls them, are bright, smart lads who would have gone wrong, usually through no fault of their own, and when their feet were set on the right track, they run like hounds toward a definite goal. They have brains. Walt Dixon is almost foolish. Master dreads mentally defective lads and degenerate ones, but he never hesitates to tackle them. Nor does Mr. Bonstone. He had what might have been a very serious case of a defective lad in this neighborhood a fortnight ago. Gringo told me about it. He came over one morning in great haste and flopped down beside me as I stood on the kitchen veranda, lapping my milk and bread breakfast. "Well, old boy," I said, "what's up with you?" "Come on out under the grapevine," he said. We walked over a little arbor where cook sits to prepare vegetables for dinner and lay down in the shade. "That's it, McGrailey brat," said Gringo. The McGrailey brat is a half-foolish boy, the only son of a very respectable Scotch-American gardener down in the village. "He tried to burn us up," said Gringo. "Good gracious, tell me about it," I said. The old boy licked his lips and began. "Last night at 12 I got up to lap up a little water from my basin in my boss's bathroom. I was just saying to myself, if I'm dry out here, the Bowery dogs must be on fire, when I heard 6 yelps from that imp Yeggie. 6 yelps, I repeated. That means trouble in the hen house." "Sure," continued Gringo. "They were pretty sharp yelps. So up I goes to master's bed and nips his foot stitching out for coolness. He's always alive. So out he tumbled and said, 'Go ahead, pup.'" "You like to have him call you pup?" I interjected. "It makes you feel young." Gringo's fine eyes grew soft. "It makes me hark back to the West, in lively days when we both acted like kids. How old are you, Gringo?" I asked curiously. "Never you mind that, young dog," he said. "I'm as old as I look, and I look younger than I am. So let me go on with my story." "You're an awful interpreter." The boss and I tumbled over each other to get to young Yeg, who was waiting out on the gravel. He pointed for the hen houses, and there was the grand Sir Walter Sparing, dodging, pushing, and barking at foolish young Willie, who had a box of matches in his hand. The young Rap had set fire to every dry patch of grass in the orchard, and neat little blazes were leaping up to greet us, too friendly by a long shot. "Dear me," I said, "this is thrilling, and everything so dry from the hot weather. What did you do?" I brushed Sir Walter and his etiquette side. "It's etiquette, Gringo," I reminded him. "It wasn't anything when I butted in," said the old dog stubbornly. "Little Willie struck my fancy as a naughty bull, and I pinned him to Mother Earth. Mister put his 2 fingers in my mouth and let a whistle screech that brought the men and other dogs rolling out over and over in 2 minutes. They'd scamper out the blazers." "What about Willie?" I asked. Gringo burst into a hearty dog laugh. I let him rise to the occasion, and he trotted to master and held out his box of matches and said, "Little Willie couldn't sleep, so he thought he'd come out and burn the bad weeds out of Mr. Bonstone's orchard, 'cause Mr. Bonstone is a kind man to Willie." I laughed too. That sounds like Yeggie's talk. The boy had just about as much sense as Yeg, said Gringo. Mister threw a bag over to Sir Walter, who was smoking and smelt to heaven, for he too had been set on fire by the thoughtful Willie. Then he takes Master Willie by his shirt collar. He was in a long-tailed garment that looked as if his mother had bought it from the old country, and down to the village he marches the boy. "Didn't Mr. Bonstone dress?" I inquired. "In what?" I suppose was rather a shocked voice, for Gringo said disdainfully, "What'd he dress for?" "He had on a pair of decent pajamas, best outfit for a hot night, and no one was abroad but the moon. However, if you must know, Thomas brought him a cloak, and he threw it on when he went out to the village. At first Willie didn't want to go home. You know what a time we have to keep him off our place, only by telling him that we were going down to the ballroom, which is his name for neighborhood hall. Could we get him started? We trundled down to McGrailey's house, and Mister pounded on the door." I made an exclamation of pity, and Gringo said my heart was sore for them too. They've good Scotch heads, and the boy's an awful drag on their peace of mind. They stood in the doorway after my boss and pounded a while, white-faced and with eyebrows up. Mister was cool, but firm as a rock. He's often told them the boy would do some damage. He walked the boy before him into a stuffy parlor and sat down to one side of the big family Bible, and the McGraileys sat on the other. "How soon can you get your lad out of this?" asked Mister by his short way. Mrs. McGrailey began to cry, and old man McGrailey looked black. "Sir," said the woman, presently lifting her head, "suppose 'twas your boy." Father McGrailey took up the cry. "Yes," he said, "suppose 'twas your boy. Would you take him out of his warm bed, where you can look at him every night, and send him where he'd be beaten and driven and scared, and he, oh, great heavens, an idiot boy!" "He isn't an idiot," said Mister. "I've told you dozens of times he's a moron. He comes first in the class of mental defectives. Imbeciles and idiots are below him, and he does not stay in his warm bed." "I couldn't send him away," wailed Mrs. McGrailey, with her arms round Willie. "I couldn't give him up. He's all I have." "I told you," said Mister, striking his hand on the table. "There's a good institution upstate, and I saw boys in your Willie's class, and their faces were fine. They were feeding lads weaker than themselves. He'd be taught a trade, too. I'm speaking for his good. He's a plague in this neighborhood." Father McGrailey looked madder. "I've heard you, sir, 100 times, say you didn't believe in no herding of people or animals together, that you wouldn't even bring up a pup in kennels if you could find a home for him." "That's so," said my boss coolly, "but I made one exception. Persons whose minds are affected cut the very bottom out of society. There are criminals. I'd doctor them. What are you doing for your boy? Come on." The man and the woman looked at each other with quite cunning faces. The boss had finished strong. I was lying beside his chair, and thinks I to myself, what'll they do now? I knew they'd win out, for I tell you, boy, a pair of parents at bay is a worse team than a pair of tigers. "Stop, Gringo, a minute," I said. "Let me get my wits to work. Two good citizens with a dangerous fool of a boy have got the richest man in the community concerned at midnight. He's got a good heart. They'll overcome him, but how? I'd give it up." "So did I," said Gringo triumphantly. "But they didn't, sir," said Mr. McGrailey in a voice that made my skin creep. It had the Scotch burr and an awful agony twisted up in it. "May you never know the heart scald that we've known. I tell you, sir, I've visited the police courts in New York. I've seen young men and women that were nothing but grown-up babies judged as if they were you or me. God pity the weak in brain, and I vowed a vow that I'd kill my son before I'd trust him to the stone heart of an unfeeling public." This was pretty stiff, and Mister began to waver. The woman came back with her old cry, "Suppose it was your boy. Suppose it was your boy." My boss's face softened. I knew his thoughts ran back to the room where the young John lay in his baby sleep, so soft, so happy, so coddled. Could anything tear that boy from his arms? Not the whole world. "My friends," he said softly, "I'm pleading for your boy. You don't understand. You're doing him an injustice to keep him here. There are institutions, I tell you, where he will be treated kindly." Mrs. McGrailey began to cry so horribly at this that Mister said in a hurry, "Well then, in the name of common sense, suggest a way out. Your boy is not going to run loose about this place. That's the very way to tear him from you." "Mr. Bonstone," said Mr. McGrailey, "you own 200 acres of wild land out Torbellon way." "Yes, mister," said he did. "Start a cottage colony, sir. Give me the post of head gardener. I'll build a house with my savings, and I'll give you the names of a score of persons like myself, who have children that are not like other children. They'll put some money in, but they won't send their boys and girls to a big institution." "I think you're wrong," said Mister, shaking his head. "Your boy would be better away from you, and you'd have to hire experts to train him and others like him." "Hire them," said Mr. McGrailey commandingly. "Look here," said my boss, "you fellows rate my bank account too high. I'm sailing close to the wind just now." "Trust you raise money," said the man almost contemptuously. "Haven't you and Randolph Granton got the name for good sense in business and wisdom in philanthropy? Ask your rich men. They'd give you funds when they'd turn a deaf ear to the likes of me." My boss got up. "Then I'm to start a private institution for Willie?" "That's it, sir," said Mr. McGrailey grimly. "You'll do that and more, too, for a neighbor." "Maybe I'm a fool," said Mister calmly, "but I'll think it over. Meanwhile, keep the boy close." "We'll do that, sir," said the man respectfully. Then he broke down, for he was all cut up. The boy had nearly killed him and his wife. He cried and she cried, and they caught the boss's hand, and God blessed him, and he fled, and left his cloak with them, and he's coming up this evening to talk the affair over with your boss. "Don't those two men beat the Dutch for doing good?" I explained. "They even get up in the night to do it." End of chapter 23.
Chapter 24. One cool, sharp afternoon, when the second summer of our stay in the country was drawing to a close, I found myself all alone over at Gringo's house. All the dogs were away somewhere, so finding no one in the orchard to gossip with me, I made up my mind to run down to the village and call on Mrs. Waverlee. It was just about 5 o'clock, and she had a nice English fashion of always having afternoon tea. When the maid brought in the tea things, there was always a blue bowl for Patsy's tea, and a pink one for any caller he might have. There was quite a nipping wind that afternoon, and the thought of that pink bowl nearly full of weak tea with 4 lumps of sugar and plenty of cream in it just warmed the cockles of my heart, so off I trotted for the village. Mrs. Waverlee was at home sitting by the fire, and looking very sweet and pretty, but rather tired, for she taught away a good deal of strength every morning. Her whole soul was in her work for the children. She patted me very kindly when I ran into her dainty drawing room, and invited me to lie down on the rug before the fire. Then she leaned back, not in her rocking chair, for she hadn't one in her house, but in a big chintz-covered armchair that fairly swallowed up her slender figure. She was gazing intently at a large oil painting that stood in the almost loving embrace of another big chair, placed in a good light from a window. Paper and wrapping stuff lay on the floor, and I guessed that the picture had just arrived. While she sat staring at it, her little maid ushered in another caller. This time it was Mr. Bonstone. He spoke nicely to her in his short manner, said "Hello, boy," to me, then stood leaning against the mantel, watching her pour out a cup of tea for him. As he approached the little table to take it from her, his eye fell on the painting. He didn't say anything, but his look said, "Ah, she has been getting a family picture from England." I have already remarked that Mrs. Waverlee was a bit of a clairvoyant. She saw he was interested, and she said in her distinct, delicate way, "It is my father, taken with my boy when we were last in England." Mr. Bonstone was slowly wiggling his spoon back and forth in his cup to dissolve the sugar. As she spoke, his eye kindled. Something in the portrait aroused his attention. Then his hand stopped moving the spoon. "Your father," he said slowly. "Yes," she repeated simply, "my dear father." Most American women would have vouchsafed some more information, seeing that his curiosity was aroused, but she was a regular Englishwoman, and could talk sweetly for hours, and tell you nothing. At last Mr. Bonstone took the initiative, and said, "May I ask his name?" "Medlington," she said, "Sir Edward Medlington." He said nothing. He was as reticent as she was, but both their eyes spoke. I saw there was something underneath his interest. He drank his tea, ate an English muffin, drew some papers from his pocket, and talked over some business with her about Neighborhood Hall. Then he took up his hat. Before he said good-bye, he went over and stood silently before the big picture. Mrs. Waverlee began to speak. She had become very friendly with him and his wife, and she did not wish to appear ungracious. I think underneath it all was a feminine desire to know why he was interested in this picture. "My father was in the army," she said, "as a young man. During an Egyptian campaign he lost a leg. A change came over him during hospital life, and he left the army and entered the church." Mr. Bonstone looked spellbound, and murmured something about noticing that the tall man in the painting, holding the little boy by the hand, had on clerical dress. "My mother died when I was a baby," Mrs. Waverlee continued, "and my father brought me up, and has always been very, very dear to me. I expect him here shortly to visit me." "Your father was not an only son, was he?" asked Mr. Bonstone. "No. He had a younger brother who came to America." "He is not living, is he?" asked Mr. Bonstone in an almost inaudible voice. "No," she said with a side glance at him. "He died some years ago. We don't know whether he left any children." "Good-bye," said Mr. Bonstone, and he held out his hand. "Good-bye," she said calmly, but their eyes met, and he grew a furious red. "My love to Stanna," she said, following him as he hurried to the door. "Thank you for all your kindness to me. If you had belonged to my own family, you could not have been kinder." He made some sort of inarticulate reply, and she came back to the painting. Then she repeated Mr. Bonstone's questions. "Your father is not an only son, and he is not living, is he?" "Why negatively," she said, "unless he knew the answers?" "He is the son of my uncle who quarreled with his father, and ran away to America with his barmaid wife. I feel the relationship, and I also recognize family traits." Her face grew a beautiful pink. "A good man, and my own cousin. Now I am not without relatives in this new country. Thank God! It will be a good thing for my boy. But I must not acknowledge this relationship until it will be welcome to this odd man." All this was intensely interesting to me, and I too turned a fresh attention to the painting. It was not difficult to recognize little Egbert as he had appeared a few years ago. The tall old man was handsome and commanding in appearance, and yet his face was the essence of gentleness as he held the boy's two small hands. Won't Gringo be excited, I thought, and I was just about to whine for the door to be opened so I could run away to him, when my dear mistress appeared. "Well, boy, you too are here," she said kindly as she came in. Then she began talking to Mrs. Waverlee about the latest news, which was something that affected me deeply and painfully. "There is to be a new kind of dog show in New York," she said, "a dog hero show. All dogs exhibited must have done something noteworthy, or they cannot be entered. You, boy, are going to go on account of the service you rendered our hostess. Gringo will be there, also King Henry and Walter Scott." "Is it to be a show for thoroughbreds alone?" asked Mrs. Waverlee. "No, breeding has nothing to do with it. It is all inner worth. Dogs who have saved persons from burning, or carried messages, or have shown great intelligence. In fact, I believe the mongrels will predominate." "When does it begin?" inquired Mrs. Waverlee. "Next week." My heart sank within me. Oh, how I dreaded a dog show! When I was a young dog, I had been exhibited several times, and every time I suffered tortures. It was not so bad in the daytime when my owners were about and everybody was watching the men who took care of the dogs, but at night it was terrible. All the dog owners went home, and the men who were left in charge invariably drank and either quarreled, played cards, or slept, and dogs would get caught in their chains and nearly strangle. Oh, that wretched drink! How much misery it causes! Then the men would tell lies about watering and feeding us, and many a dog suffered the tortures of hunger and thirst. There were a few conscientious attendants, but very few. I dreaded intensely going through this again. Indeed, my sufferings at a dog show were responsible for my wandering life, for it was after being exhibited 7 times in one spring that I ran away from my first home with a dog fancier. Another thing I dreaded in connection with the forthcoming dog show was that everybody would find out how valuable I was, and attention would be drawn to me as a desirable dog to steal. Mr. Granton knew that my points were good, but he had never chanced to meet anyone who could tell him just how good they were. He didn't know a very doggy set of men. Well, the day came, and I was entered at the show, and the thing itself was not half as bad as I thought it would be. These dogs were all very much beloved by their owners, and were not held on account of their value as dogs, but as heroes and dog friends to mankind. I was uneasy, for I hated being taken from my nice home and being deprived of my liberty, but I underwent no actual suffering. For there was no drink there, and Louis, who was very fond of King Henry, slept both nights the show lasted, curled up in the straw in the big box place our good bloodhound occupied, so we did not suffer. Gringo was furious at having to go. He hated notoriety, and he hated being taken away from Mr. Bonstone, and Mr. Bonstone was just as upset as he was, but there was no help for it. The show was for charity, and to acquaint New York with the actual value of the dog heroes of the country, dogs who had risked their lives to save human beings from harm. The dog who took first prize was a little mongrel who had so little thoroughbred in him that nobody could tell in which class of dogs his ancestors had started. He had saved 500 hotel guests from death by fire. The hotel was a regular fire trap, and he had barked and raged when he smelt the smoke, till he drew attention to the dreadful danger, and everyone got out while the hotel burnt to the ground. Gringo got third prize. I was surprised to hear how many events the modest old dog had been in. He was chained next to me, and his remarks on the show were killing. He loathed vain dogs. These fellows who adore shows, and when the traveling boxes are brought out, bark with excitement, and on arriving, bask all day long in popular approval. I had honorable mention. Gringo thought I would get a prize, but when I looked round the show, I said, "Some of these fellows here will ride roughshod over me. It's amazing what a sum of fidelity to the human race they represent." The event of the show to me was, as I had anticipated, the finding out of my value. I was adjudged the best dog of all breeds shown, and my value was placed at $7,000. How I regretted this! Coarse, sporty-looking men, who bestowed not a glance on the noble animals who had saved precious lives, came and stood before me with their beefy faces alight with interest. Most unfortunately, however, it was not the sporting class that took the keenest interest in me. Those men were rough but honest. 2 young men of the white-faced, putty-looking class that Master and Mr. Bonstone dread so much to handle made me tremble. They did not come up and stand before me, to admire me and ask questions. They stood a long way off, and they got a boy to go and ask an attendant particularly where I lived. I knew I should have trouble with them some time in the future, and I vowed that they would be pretty clever to catch me napping. Both days I was at the show, they came several times to stare at me surreptitiously, and the second day they brought another fellow of their own class with them. I tried not to worry, and repeated to myself something that Master often murmurs when he is putting on his shoes to go downtown. Where are the worries I had this time last year? Gone with the snows of winter and the roses of summer. Therefore, why worry over the worries of today? The pleasantest thing about the show was, of course, the twice-a-day visits of our owners. The second day, Mr. Bonstone approached our bench, accompanied by Mrs. Waverlee, Egbert, and a tall old gentleman who limped quite a bit. "Wooden leg," muttered Gringo. "It's the boy's grandfather." I had told Gringo of his master's interest in the portrait of the old baronet. He was as keenly interested as I was, and with me concluded that Mrs. Waverlee was correct. Mr. Bonstone was her cousin. "Why don't they out with it?" said the old dog. "I hate secrets." Well, they did out with it this day. A dog show seemed a strange place for a recognition between a noble Englishman and his long-lost nephew, but stranger things than that have happened. Sir Edward had arrived 2 days before, and Mr. Bonstone had not seen him until he met him coming into the show with Mrs. Waverlee and Egbert. Gringo and I stared at them. "My poor boss," said the old dog. "His eyes are eager. He'd like to have relatives like other folks." Mrs. Waverlee was sweetly self-possessed. No one would have guessed that she was very much excited and was watching her father and Mr. Bonstone surreptitiously. I have forgotten to say that Walter Scott was chained the other side of Gringo and King Harry, and the 3 grown-up persons and the boy were fondling us alternately. Mr. Bonstone was delighted that he would be able to take Gringo away that evening. "Only a few more hours, kid," he said in a very low voice as he softly rubbed his hand over Gringo's rose ears. A seal ring, his only ornament, for he hated even a breastpin, caught the old baronet's eye. Now he had evidently noticed no familiar resemblance in this man, but he could not help recognizing the ring on which was engraved the family crest. He didn't say anything. He was a very well set up, self-possessed old gentleman, and very English. He simply turned a little pale, and said, "May I look at that ring?" Mr. Bonstone nodded, and taking it off, handed it to him. "This old man's father was a Tartar," Gringo whispered to me. "It's rough on him to remember how he and the younger brother who had pluck enough to run away were bully-ragged." Mr. Bonstone stood fondling Gringo's head, and looked calmly at his relative. "Good blood," muttered Gringo. "Do you notice, boy, that the quality don't shriek and tear their hair over great events. They're quiet as the grave." I didn't say anything, but I imagined the panorama passing before the eyes of the fine-looking old man turning the ring round and round in his hand. Having been in England, I could call up a picture of the old country house, the pleasant life, the gentle mother, the domineering old father, the submission of the elder son, the rebellion of the younger, and now the younger son was dead, but his son lived and would slip into the place of his father in this old man's heart. "Your Christian names?" asked Sir Edward in a low voice as he returned the ring. "Edward Norman Mannering." Sir Edward's eyes clouded. He dropped his head on his breast for a few seconds. His dead brother had given his own dear brother's name to his son. Then he spoke again. "Why Bonstone?" "My mother's name," said Mr. Bonstone shortly. Sir Edward glanced at Mrs. Waverlee, who had moved away a few paces while the 2 men were talking. She smiled brightly. She understood. Then he said in a low but a beautiful affectionate voice, "You have your father's eyes. Give me your arm, my boy." "Gringo," I said, "isn't that a perfectly touching sight, to see that dear old man going about leaning on those 2 young people?" Gringo spoke very gruffly. He pretended he didn't care, but I could see he was deeply moved. "Now my kind master's got some folks," he said. "There's not a line of worry about him. We'll see something very fancy in his life now." And we did, for it appeared that the possession of relatives of his own had been the one thing lacking to round out Mr. Bonstone's beautiful life. His devotion to his uncle was superb. He was down at Mrs. Waverlee's constantly, and when he was not there, Sir Edward was at Green Hill. There was a great excitement all over this place, and in New York too, when it was announced that Mr. Bonstone was related to the distinguished English army officer and present clergyman, Sir Edward Medlington, and was a cousin of the aristocratic Mrs. Waverlee. Nobody seemed jealous. Everybody was glad. Mrs. Resterton basked in reflected light. She dragged in the title whenever she could with propriety, and the way she mouthed the Sir Edward was lovely to hear. Gringo grinned whenever he heard her. Never before heard two words giving a woman such satisfaction, he said. The nice old lady's only regret was that the title passed to Egbert as the son of the eldest son, rather than to Mr. Bonstone as the son of the younger. I heard Mrs. Bonstone one day enlightening her. "Grandmamma," she said, "don't you understand Norman well enough to know that if he had inherited a whole bushel of titles, he would reject them all? As it is, he often shocks his uncle by his democratic ways. No, Norman is a plain American. He has thrown off his English traditions." "Sir Norman has a very pleasant sound," said the old lady plaintively. How Mrs. Bonstone laughed. "And Lady Bonstone or Lady Medlington," she said. "Wouldn't that be charming? Imagine a milkmaid and a poultrywoman with a title. That is all I aspire to be." The dogs, too, were very fond of talking about the baronet, and great discussions took place up in the orchard about his title, and his artificial leg, and his nice, simple ways, and his clear manner of speaking. Some of the dogs held that it was a great pity that a baronet should have a wooden or a cork leg. We couldn't find out which it was, for his manservant never talked, and Patsy, the fox terrier, was no gossip. "Why not a baronet?" said Gringo. "He's just the one to afford time to go limping about." The dogs could also not understand his being a clergyman and rector of a church. "Yeggie thought he'd wear a pink coat and go round looking for foxes to hunt," said the little cur, jumping up and down, "but he never kills anything but fish, and he bangs them on the head as soon as they're caught, so they won't suffer. I heard him say so the other day." "I thought he'd get drunk every night," said King Harry. "I once knew an English earl down in Virginia, and his valet had to sit up till 1 o'clock to undress him." This put the old country dogs on their mettle. Gringo, Walter Scott, and Canny snapped at good King Henry, and told him that the English aristocracy were as sober as any class of people. "And if our people had any faults," added Walter Scott, "the war has taken them all away." "Where is the nobleman today?" I asked one chill November afternoon of the assembled dogs. "Down the river," said Yeggie. "I saw him going Walt Dixon's way." It seemed strange that there should be any connection between this fine old English gentleman and a poor miserable lad from New York, but there was one strong bond of union. They were both ardent fishermen. Now last spring my master had taken great pains to interest Walt in some form of outdoor exercise. He was so lazy that fishing was the only sport he could be induced to undertake, but as time went on he became an enthusiast, and no one in the whole country round about knew as well as he just which fishing holes to visit to get a bite. There were several small rivers near us, and Walt knew them all. Sir Edward, finding out that Walt would be more use to him than any one in the neighbourhood, cultivated him assiduously. My master was delighted. This association was of inestimable benefit to the boy he was trying to befriend. Yeggie came dancing up to Gringo one day, and asked why the distinguished stranger was finding out about fishing in this cold autumn weather. "Don't you know, pup," said Gringo with a wink at me, "that folks hang round what their mouths water for? Give me the name of the dog that lingers long round the kitchen windows when the good hot smell of meat is wafted out." Yeggie hung his little head. "The noble baronet is laying out the land for next spring, when he's coming back to see us all," Gringo continued. "He's got to get home soon to his church. He's a good man. He works. Some folks and some dogs are lazy. They don't earn their salt." "Good bye," said Yeggie abruptly. "Yeggie's going to call on the hens," and he diddled away. Gringo laughed heartily as he disappeared round the corner of the barn. "I like that little fool kid dog," he said. "Sir Edward has been gone ever since lunch," I remarked. "I know, because he lunched at our house today, and soon afterward went for a walk up the Lalabee River Road." "He ought to be back soon," said Gringo. "The dark is coming on." How well I remember that afternoon. Nobody was anxious about Sir Edward, but in half an hour, when it became quite dark and he had not returned, there was great excitement. A man with an artificial leg who takes long walks is something of a marvel, but he cannot go on indefinitely, and he never had stayed out as long as this before. There was really painful anxiety at last. I, suspecting nothing wrong, had gone home, and was playing with George Washington in the nursery when Bessie the nurse came in and called Mrs. Granton to the telephone. I followed her and heard enough to assure me that everybody was out looking for Sir Edward, and they had decided to ask for King Harry to trail him. Mrs. Granton was in great trouble. "Oh, Norman," she said to Mr. Bonstone, who was telephoning, "there was a child lost in Torbellon this morning, and an hour ago some men came in a car and got King Harry to track her. Have you tried Walt Dixon?" I couldn't hear Mr. Bonstone's reply, but I knew by what Mrs. Granton said he had thought the hound would be quicker. However, failing the hound, he would try Walt. I tore out through the front hall and ran over to Green Hill. On the way, I met Mr. Bonstone in an automobile hurrying down to the village for Walt. Afterward, we all heard the story of the rescue from Gringo, who went with his master. Walt told Mr. Bonstone which road Sir Edward had taken, and the two followed it in the car, and occasionally leaving it to plunge into the bushes by the river bank at places Walt thought might be visited by Sir Edward. They had a lantern with them, for by this time it was quite dark. Mr. Bonstone at last became frightfully nervous, not outside, for he was not that kind, but internally nervous. "Walt," he said, "think hard. I heard you talking to Sir Edward yesterday. Did he say anything to make you think he might take some new road you've never been over?" Walt thought a moment, then he said, "I did tell him of a new pool high up in the river, that no one but me knows about. I got a dozen trout there one early morning last spring, but he couldn't get there alone, I told him. It's a rough road." "Just the one he'd try," said Mr. Bonstone. "Jump in and lead me to it." This time, when they left the car, they took a rocky path to the little river. "There's a tiny islet in the middle of the river," said Walt, "with stepping stones to it, but I guess he couldn't make it." "I'll wager he's there," Mr. Bonstone muttered. Then he lifted up his voice and yelled, "Hello! Hello!" till Gringo says the woods by the river rang with the sound. Then he listened, and at once came a husky peeping like a bird with a cold in its throat. They were close to the islet, and Mr. Bonstone, swinging the lantern for the boy behind him, skipped over the stepping stones to it. There was a solitary tree rooted among the rocks, and there, hanging to a low-growing limb, was the poor baronet. His keen angler's instinct had caused him to mount the limb to see if it would be a good place from which to throw a line. His wooden leg had caught in the crook of the limb, and there he hung, almost head down, until his strength had been exhausted. Mr. Bonstone and Walt soon got him down, carried him to the car, and gave him a drink from a flask that Mrs. Bonstone had provided. Then they rushed him to the Green Hill house, which was nearer than Mrs. Waverlee's, and put him to bed. All the family came to inquire about him. Mrs. Waverlee was very much troubled in her quiet way, and poor Egbert was trying hard not to cry. Master, who was almost as upset as Sir Edward's own family, said to Mrs. Resterton, "Why in the name of common sense did that old man with a wooden leg try to climb a tree on a dark night?" Mrs. Resterton was dreadfully flushed, and was fanning herself violently. "You have just come from town," she said. "You don't know that it was quite light when Sir Edward started, and you don't understand how crazy he is about fishing. He is always studying those books on angling in the library." "I'm not fond of fishing," said master, "so I don't share his enthusiasm, but what I do like about the affair is the part my poor boy Walt has played." "He certainly tracked Sir Edward," said Mrs. Resterton, "but for him, Sir Edward might have died before Norman found him." "She got the baronet's title in twice that time," snickered Gringo, who was lying beside me at Mrs. Resterton's feet. Then he began to pant nervously, for the old dog's sympathies had been aroused, and he had tramped fast all through the woods with his master and Walt. "Well," I said to him, "isn't this a queer world? Seems as if when a dog or a man does a kind deed, he always gets his pay for it." Gringo stopped panting long enough to say, "Sure, and it's my wonder that when folks are so keen for rewards, they don't do more good. There's big interest on being decent." "They'll do something handsome for Walt," I said. "You bet," returned Gringo. "His nest won't want for no feathers from this out." "Any feathers, Gringo," I said gently. "Oh, shut up," he growled. "You know what I mean." "I don't wish other dogs to make game of you," I said firmly. "Bah! What's grammar?" he said contemptuously. "It isn't grammar," I said. "It's good English." "I'm American now," he growled. "I'll talk as I like." "All right," I replied. "I'll never correct you again." "Yes, you will," he said crossly. "You just dare to stop correcting me." "But you resent it," I said. "You make me mad the way you rub it in," he flared up. "Just correct me and don't gab." I couldn't help laughing, and soon the good old fellow joined me. "Gringo," I said, "we're good friends, always and forever." "You bet," he said. I was going to correct him. Then I reflected that "you bet," though slangy, is decidedly English, and I ran away home after my master, who went to take the good news of Sir Edward's return to his wife. Chapter 25